The courtroom doors creaked open, letting in a hushed wave of whispers as the girl entered. 6-year-old Lily gripped the leash in her tiny hand, walking slowly beside a large German shepherd with calm, amber eyes. Her blonde hair was pulled into a lopsided ponytail, and her small shoes squeaked slightly with each step. Every gaze shifted to her jurors, lawyers, the press, even the bailiff. She was the centerpiece of the trial now, though she hadn't spoken a word in weeks. She didn't look around the room. She didn't need to. Her eyes were fixed straight ahead, but the tension in her shoulders and the tight way she gripped the dog's leash said everything. This wasn't just any day, and this wasn't just any dog. Max, the dog walking beside her, had once served with the city's canine unit, trained to detect drugs, defend officers, and sense danger. He had retired from active duty just a year earlier, but what the police lost, Lily gained. Max had been placed with her through a trauma therapy program for children who had survived crimes. Too horrific to put into words. She hadn't spoken since the day she was found shivering in a storm drain, covered in mud and bruises, clothes torn, and eyes blank. No one knew what she had endured during those missing 4 days. She had simply gone silent, not out of defiance but fear. Now, sitting in the middle of the courtroom, Lily looked impossibly small in the oversized wooden witness chair. Her feet dangled above the floor. A booster cushion was placed behind her, but even that couldn't hide how fragile she looked. She pulled Max closer. He settled beside her, his frame alert, but still. His nose twitched. His ears flicked once. The judge watched them carefully. Judge Halbrand had seen hundreds of witnesses come through his courtroom, but this was different. The case had captivated the entire state. A girl taken in broad daylight from outside her school, a suspect with no prior convictions, no DNA, no surveillance footage that could conclusively prove anything. And yet something about him had unsettled the officers from day one. Max's application to appear in court with Lily had initially sparked debate. Was it legal? Was it ethical? Could a dog influence a jury? But her therapist had argued hard. Lily doesn't feel safe without him. Without Max, she won't come to court. With Max, there's a chance she will. And now, here they were. The prosecutor, a sharp-eyed woman named Julia Martinez, stepped forward and spoke gently. Your Honor, if it pleases the court, the witness is ready. The judge nodded. Proceed. Lily's gaze didn't leave the man sitting across from her, the accused. Darren Cole, 38, former janitor, clean record, a face so plain it could disappear in a crowd. But Lily's eyes told a different story. She knew that face, knew it too well. Julia knelt down beside her. Hi, Lily, she whispered. You don't have to talk if you don't want to. You're safe here. Max is here. I'm here. The judge is here. We're all listening, okay? Lily gave the faintest nod, but her lips stayed sealed. Her hand moved slightly toward Max's collar, fingers brushing the soft fur, a familiar action now, almost like muscle memory. Max responded by leaning into her leg just a little, offering silent reassurance. The courtroom held its collective breath. The defense attorney, a middle-aged man with silver-rimmed glasses and a tie-dye suit, leaned back in his chair. He looked relaxed, confident even. She wouldn't speak, and if she didn't speak, they couldn't use her as a witness. Without Lily's testimony, their case was threadbare at best. Judge Halbrand watched the dog more than the girl. He'd been briefed about Max, told how the girl and the dog had developed a silent communication system using hand signals. How Max had learned to respond to her cues with remarkable accuracy. How he behaved more like a trained officer than a therapy pet. How, for Lily, Max was more than comfort, he was expression. The judge leaned slightly forward. He didn't say anything, but his eyes never left the pair. Julia continued softly, do you remember when you and Max first met? Lily's fingers curled tighter around Max's fur. He didn't move. He didn't even blink. Was he nice to you? Julia tried again. Did he make you feel safe? Nothing. Not a word. Just silence. Julia stood up, walked back to the prosecution's table, and picked up a piece of paper. It was a drawing Lily had made during one of her therapy sessions. The image showed a figure of a man with a jagged scar near his lip, just like Darren Cole Land. Beside the man was a child hiding behind a dog. The meaning was unmistakable. Julia showed it to the judge and then to the jury. This drawing, she said, was made before she even knew she would be asked to testify. A murmur rippled through the court. Darren shifted uncomfortably in his seat for the first time since Lily had entered, and Max's eyes sharp, focus locked onto him with unrelenting intensity. Something subtle passed between Lily and Max just then. A tiny movement, a shift in breath, a squeeze of the hand. The judge saw it, and he knew this wasn't over, not by a long shot. While the courtroom slowly adjusted to the presence of a silent child and her stoic canine, only a few truly understood the weight of that moment. Most saw a frightened little girl with her support animal, but those closest to Lily, her therapist, her guardian, and the woman seated in the prosecution chair knew better. Max wasn't just a dog. He was Lily's voice. 2 months earlier, when Lily was found after disappearing for horrifying days, no one expected her to survive, let alone walk, eat, or sit quietly beside a stranger in a courtroom. She was found curled inside a concrete storm drain, barely conscious. Her body bore bruises. Her voice was gone, not from injury but trauma. She hadn't spoken since. The doctors called it selective mutism, trauma-induced. The detectives called it heartbreaking. But the moment Max walked into her hospital room, something in her changed. It wasn't dramatic. No sudden hugs or smiles. Just a blink, a shift in her shoulders, a tiny hand reaching forward to brush against his fur. He lay beside her that day and refused to leave. When hospital staff moved him, he returned. When Lily was taken to therapy, he paced the room until he was allowed in. Her guardian, a maternal aunt who had taken custody, watched in disbelief. As Max became the only thing Lily trusted, he wasn't assigned to her randomly. Max had once been a decorated police K-9, trained in both narcotics detection and threat assessment, but a hip injury had led to his early retirement. Now, he was part of a program pairing retired service animals with child victims. He had been evaluated and retrained, still obedient, still precise, but now his purpose was different. Healing. Lily responded to no one but Max. She watched his every move. Within weeks, her therapist had taught her basic nonverbal communication, yes, no signals, hand gestures, and cue-based interaction using Max. She would give a subtle flick of her fingers and Max would respond it, stay, nudge, stare, even growl if told. These weren't commands for show, they were expressions. Her way of speaking through someone she trusted. And now, in the courtroom, those same gestures held power. The judge, after reviewing multiple reports and therapy notes, had approved Max's presence in court, not as evidence, not as testimony, but as accommodation, a living, breathing bridge between Lily and the terrifying task ahead of her. Prosecutor Julia Martinez had spent days watching them work together the night before the trial. She visited Lily's guardian's home. Max greeted her calmly at the door, as if he'd been expecting her. Inside, Lily was seated on a rug, drawing. She didn't look up. Julia approached gently and sat a few feet away. "You know I'll be there tomorrow, right?" she asked. Lily didn't speak, but she nodded slightly. Max stood beside her, ears perked. "I'll ask a few questions, and if you don't want to talk, that's okay. But if Max knows what you want, he can help." Lily tilted her head. A small flick of her fingers, almost invisible, passed toward Max. He immediately sat and stared at Julia. It startled her. "Was that about me?" she asked with a soft laugh. Lily glanced at Max and made another motion. Max growled low and short. Julia blinked. "I guess that's a no." Her guardian chuckled from the kitchen. "You passed. That means she trusts you." The next morning, Julia entered the courtroom not just as a lawyer, but as Lily's advocate. Now, standing beside the jury, she watched Max carefully. Every twitch of his ear or slight change in posture told her something. This wasn't theatrics. This was communication. The defense, however, wasn't convinced. "She hasn't spoken in months," the defense attorney argued to the judge during a sidebar. "This dog can't be used as testimony." "I'm not treating the dog as testimony," Judge Halbern replied. "He's a support animal." "Your Honor," that animal growled in open court when my client shifted in his seat. "This is influencing the jury." Halbern leaned forward. He growled after the girl pointed at your client. He didn't act on his own, and the jury saw that. The defense attorney paused. He hadn't noticed the gesture. Judge Halbern had. Back in session, Julia retrieved another drawing from her folder, a stick figure of a dog, a girl, and a tall shadowy man with X over his eyes. In the background, a dark square meant to represent a small room, possibly a closet or a van. "Did you draw this, Lily?" Julia asked softly. No answer, but Lily's hand moved slow. deliberate toward Max, a flick downward, then a slight curl of her fingers. Max stood and walked a few paces toward the defense table before stopping. His body became still. His eyes locked on Darren Cole, not aggressive but focused. The tension in the courtroom grew thick. Judge Halpern didn't stop him. He merely observed, and Darren, his jaw clenched. He stared back at the dog, but blinked first. Max returned to Lily and sat. Julia turned to the jury. Ladies and gentlemen, I ask you not to see a silent child, but to witness a connection so deep. It transcends words. Whispers broke out behind her. One juror wiped a tear. Another shifted uncomfortably. It was no longer just about logic. It was about truth in its rawest form. Max hadn't barked. He hadn't attacked. But he had spoken. Lily leaned into him now, her head resting against his side, and in the front row. Her hand covered her mouth, barely holding back emotion. Outside, the press waited for updates. Inside, something monumental was quietly unfolding. A girl who couldn't speak had found her voice, and her dog was about to lead everyone to the truth she'd been too afraid to tell. The courtroom silence was no longer awkward. It had become electric alive with the collective realization that something unspoken had just occurred. Lily, with no words at all, had pointed at a man accused of abducting her. Her dog had responded, not wildly, but with precise stillness and unwavering focus. The jury noticed. The judge noticed. And for the first time, Darren Cole noticed that his defense strategy discrediting a silent child might not be enough. The judge called for a brief recess. Lily was led out quietly with Max trotting beside her. Julia watched her go, heart pounding. Her plan had always been to build toward something like this, but she hadn't expected it to unfold so early. The child was showing strength even she hadn't predicted. And Max? He wasn't just responding. He was protecting. Inside the hallway, Lily sat on a bench with her aunt. Max lay stretched in front of her like a wall of muscle and warmth. She rested her fingers on his back, drawing small circles. The aunt reached over and kissed her forehead. Lily leaned into her, eyes still on the door they just exited. She's okay, the aunt whispered. You did so good, baby. You and Max. Lily didn't speak, but her fingers tapped a quiet rhythm on Max's side, a secret language only she and the dog shared. Back in the courtroom, Darren Cole sat unnerved. His attorney leaned in, whispering sharply. Don't react again, he hissed. You flinched. The dog saw it. The jury saw it. Darren didn't respond. For months, he had kept cool. No one had linked him directly to Lily's disappearance. He had no record. He cooperated with police, but the girl knew something, and somehow, that dog did too. That combination was beginning to terrify him. The judge returned and called the court back into session. Julia stood once again. Your Honor, she said, we'd like to recall Lily for one more question. The defense attorney objected. She hasn't spoken. This is theater. The judge raised an eyebrow. You're free to cross-examine if you feel it's necessary. Lily was led back in. This time, she didn't hesitate. She walked a bit taller. Max was calm, but alert, his eyes scanning the room as they returned. To the witness chair, he sat close, his body pressed against hers, a silent reassurance that she was not alone. Julia stepped forward gently. Lily, you don't have to say anything. You've already been so brave. But if you want, you can answer one question with Max's help. Lily blinked, her expression unreadable. Julia continued, carefully holding up a new drawing. Can you tell me if this man, she pointed to the figure in the picture, a tall man with dark lines under his eyes, is here in this room right now? Lily didn't speak. She didn't need to. Her hand, slow but confident, moved toward Max. She gave the short signals. One flick, one down-pointing tap. Max rose again. The courtroom froze. He walked straight forward, measured. Comment stopped in front of Darren Cole's table. He didn't growl. He didn't bark. He just stood, eyes locked, still as stone. Gasps echoed through the gallery. The defense attorney leapt up. Your Honor, this is inappropriate. This dog is being used to sway the jury. But Judge Halpern's eyes were on Lily, and what he saw wasn't manipulation. It was memory, pain, truth. Mr. Waters, the judge said slowly, if you believe your client is innocent, then this dog's actions should pose no threat. The courtroom buzzed. Julia stepped back. She had what she needed. Max returned to Lily, laid down, and placed his head across her foot. The defense was left scrambling. Mr. Waters stood. "If I may, Your Honor, we would like to request permission to cross-examine the child." The judge sighed. "You may proceed, but be mindful of tone and content." Waters approached the bench, attempting to soften his appearance. "Hi, Lily," he began with a thin smile. "I know this is scary. I know you've been through a lot, but I want to ask you a question, a simple one." She didn't respond. "Do you know for sure that the man you just pointed at my client was the one who hurt you?" Lily stared ahead. Waters smiled again. "Or are you just scared of all men who look like him?" Julia tensed. Then Lily moved, not toward Max this time, but toward her lap. She reached into a small side pocket in her dress and pulled out a folded piece of paper. The judge nodded to her aunt, who helped pass it forward. It was another drawing, but this one was different. It showed the inside of a van. The same man with X over his eyes, Lily in the back seat, a red stop sign. Outside the window, Waters opened his mouth, but closed it again. He hadn't expected this. Julia leaned over. "Permission to admit this new drawing as evidence?" The judge nodded, admitted. Waters stepped back, rattled. His client refused to meet his eyes. Julia turned back to the jury. She didn't just guess. She remembers. And that memory, however, expressed as the most powerful truth we have. The courtroom sat in stunned silence. For the first time in weeks, Lily's fingers left Max. She sat still, unblinking, and though she hadn't said a single word, her message had been heard loud and clear. Justice had begun to stir. Even the air seemed to stop moving, suspended between the faint scribbles of reporters and the soft shifting of jurors in their seats. No one dared whisper. No one blinked. All eyes were on the small figure in the witness chair, Lily, and the loyal dog by her side. She had already said so much without speaking, through drawings, through Max, through stillness and gestures, and now, with the defense retreating and the judge watching with piercing focus, something unexpected began to build. Julia didn't plan to push the moment. She had seen what needed to be seen. She had her proof: Lily's drawings, Max's reactions, the jurors' changed expressions. But Lily didn't look away. Her gaze stayed firmly locked on Darren Cole. The judge cleared his throat. "Miss Martinez, you may continue." Julia stepped forward slowly. "Lily," she said softly, "if you want, you can answer this one. Last question with words. Just one word if you're ready, and if you're not, that's okay too." Lily didn't blink. Her shoulders shifted slightly. Beside her, Max remained stone still. Julia hesitated, then asked, "Is the man who took you here in this room?" Seconds passed. A full 5, then 6, and then a whisper, soft, dry, barely a breath. "Him." The word floated into the courtroom like a match struck. In darkness, gasps, audible now, Julia stood frozen, unsure if she had heard right. The judge leaned forward. Jurors turned to one another, stunned. Lily's aunt covered her mouth, eyes welling instantly. And Max leaned gently into Lily's legs, ears tilting as if to say, "You did it." It was the first word Lily had spoken in nearly 9 weeks. Him. The word struck like a hammer, precise and final. Darren Cole shifted in his chair. Adjusting his collar, his lawyer placed a hand on his arm, whispering something urgent. But the damage had already taken root. The jury saw her, not just the victim, but now the witness. One word had sealed a connection they could no longer ignore. Julia stepped back, tears rising in her eyes. She hadn't expected it, didn't ask for it, but Lily had chosen to speak. The judge leaned into his mic. Let the record reflect that the witness verbally identified the defendant as her abductor. The court stenographer, whose fingers had danced rapidly all morning, paused for the briefest moment to glance up. Even she looked shaken. The defense attorney stood up, trying to salvage ground. "Your Honor, we move to strike the identification. This child has been selectively mute, and any utterance may have been influenced." The judge raised a hand, overruled. But she was not prompted. She was asked a question and chose to respond. The jury will determine what weight to assign her statement. The defense sat down hard. Julia, back at her table, kept her eyes on Lily, not out of pity but awe. This wasn't just about trauma anymore. This was about courage. Quiet, trembling courage that had chosen the exact right moment to rise. Reporters outside began typing as updates rolled in. Breaking. Young girl breaks silence in court. Identifies suspect with one word. Courtroom stunned as child speaks. After weeks of silence, 6-year-old survivor shifts trial with single whisper. The buzz reached beyond the courthouse walls. Back inside, the judge paused for a recess. Lily stepped down slowly from the chair. Max followed, eyes darting constantly as if protecting her from invisible threats. The bailiff opened the door as Lily and her aunt exited into the hallway, where paramedics and trauma counselors waited nearby. Lily didn't stop to speak to anyone, but as they passed a mirror on the wall, Lily looked at her reflection for the first time since the trial began. She didn't smile, but her eyes had changed, and in that glance, her aunt saw something she hadn't seen in months, a spark. Back in the courtroom, chaos whispered in quiet corners. The defense team huddled, their confidence fading. That wasn't supposed to happen, Waters muttered, adjusting his tie. She wasn't supposed to talk. Cole grunted. It's one word that just wrecked our reasonable doubt, Waters hissed. The judge returned after the break, composed but visibly affected. Before we proceed, I want to acknowledge what we all witnessed today, he said, not just a child finding her voice, but the extraordinary role her service animal played in helping her feel safe. This trial is not about theatrics, it is about truth, and today, we got closer to it. He then addressed the jury. You are to weigh today's events with care, not emotion. The witness's testimony, verbal and nonverbal, must be measured just as you would any other. But you cannot unhear what was said, nor should you. No one spoke. Max's presence was still fresh in everyone's mind. The judge signaled to Julia, you may call your next witness. She stood, but paused. Your Honor, we request a recess until tomorrow morning. Granted. Gavel struck. Court adjourned. But the energy in the room stayed high, buzzing with disbelief. The whisper of a child had echoed louder than any scream. Outside the courthouse, journalists scrambled for space. Inside a black SUV, Lily sat silently with her aunt and Max, the large dog's head resting on her lap. She stroked behind his ear slowly, her lips still pressed in a line, but her body relaxed for the first time since the trial began. Max shifted, adjusting himself to face her. Their eyes met. He hadn't spoken a word either, but like her, he didn't have to. They had already said everything that mattered. By the time the next court session began, the tone inside the courtroom had shifted entirely. Gone was the doubt. Gone was the quiet skepticism that had once lingered when Lily first took the stand, silent and withdrawn. Instead, the room now buzzed with tension, this time centered around the defense table. Something had changed. One whispered word had flipped the dynamic. Darren Cole sat rigid in his chair, staring straight ahead, pretending not to notice the way every juror's eyes occasionally flicked toward him with sharper scrutiny. His lawyer, Mr. Waters, wore forced confidence. Shuffling papers like that would somehow restore control. But nothing could erase what had happened yesterday. Lily had spoken, and it wasn't just what she said, it was how. That fragile whisper, him, wasn't merely a child's fearful guess. It was a verbal arrow, flung with silent strength and landed with pinpoint precision. And it had been backed by something even more damning. Max, the dog, had never barked, growled, or lunged. He hadn't needed to. His behavior, calm yet intentional, spoke volumes. A dog that had been trained to react to danger, to threats, and more importantly to respond to specific cues from a child who hadn't spoken in weeks. The courtroom, once emotionally detached, now felt personal, raw. Judge Halpern took his seat, hands folded. His voice was measured but heavy with intention. This court reminds all parties to maintain respect, clarity, and truth. The testimony so far has introduced elements that, while unique, are not without precedent. We move forward with caution and resolve. The prosecution resumed. Julia Martinez walked toward the jury box with a set of documents in hand. Her demeanor was quiet, calm, but confident. She knew what she had to do. She had to show that Lily's whisper wasn't isolated. It was the final drop after a slow, steady leak of truth. Ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Julia began. What you saw yesterday was not a performance. It was the culmination of weeks of silent communication, of healing, and memory surfacing through trust. She held up a report. This is Lily's trauma assessment conducted just a week after her rescue. In it, she was shown multiple photographs of different men. Only one caused a reaction: elevated heart rate, increased breathing, refusal to continue. She displayed the photo on the projector. It was Darren Cole. Murmurs ran through the courtroom. Julia then brought forward another piece of evidence, a scanned image of a drawing Lily had made. The second week after returning home, the image, a large van, a man's hand reaching into it, and a girl crying in the corner. She didn't describe him with words, Julia said. She described him with fear. At the defense table, Waters stood quickly. Objection, none of this is sworn verbal testimony. Sustained in part, the judge replied, the jury may view the evidence as supplemental, but it cannot replace direct testimony. Julia nodded. Understood. Then she added, but testimony can come in many forms, Your Honor. When a child's voice has been taken from them, she turned back to the jury, and yesterday, you heard her reclaim it. At that, Waters rose for cross-examination. His frustration simmered just beneath the surface. Miss Martinez, are you suggesting a child's drawing should be held with the same weight as physical evidence? I'm saying a child's trauma leaves breadcrumbs, Mr. Waters. Sometimes, those breadcrumbs speak louder than fingerprints. Waters scoffed slightly, and the dog. We're supposed to convict based on where a dog looked. Julia didn't flinch. Max is not just a dog. He's a decorated former K-9, trained to respond to specific visual cues, vocal changes, and behavioral shifts. He's not simply reacting, he's interpreting, as trained. Waters shook his head. And the jury's supposed to believe this child's drawing. A growl and a whispered word are enough to condemn a man with no criminal history. Julia stepped forward. Sometimes, Mr. Waters, the absence of past crimes only hides the ones that went undetected. The judge called for a lunch recess. As the courtroom emptied, Waters pulled Cole aside. You need to stay calm. Don't react. They're trying to trap you with emotion. I didn't do anything, Cole growled. Then sit like it, Waters snapped. Out in the courthouse hallway, Lily sat quietly with her aunt and Max. A soft patch of sunlight streamed through the window and bathed Max in a warm glow. His eyes were closed, but his ears twitched every time the courtroom doors opened or a loud voice echoed nearby. Lily leaned against her aunt, not tired, but quiet in her own thoughts. A woman from victim support offered her a juice box. Lily took it, then turned to Max and made a quick two-finger flick across her leg. He raised his head instantly. Good boy, her aunt whispered. Back in the courtroom, the energy was different now. The jurors had changed. They weren't watching Julia anymore. They weren't watching the judge. They were watching Darren Cole. They watched how he shifted, how he avoided looking at Lily, how the calm mask he wore now showed small cracks. One word had done that, a child's word, and now it was only a matter of time before everything else began to unravel. The courtroom was noticeably quieter as the session resumed after lunch. Even the usual shifting of papers and shuffling feet were hushed by the tension hanging in the air. Judge Halpern gave a nod to the court clerk, and the proceedings resumed. Julia Martinez stepped forward once more, now joined by a new witness, a behavioral psychologist, Dr. Elise Warren. Calm and professional, Dr. Warren specialized in working with trauma-affected children, especially those who had survived abduction or abuse. Julia wasted no time. Dr. Warren, can you explain how trauma can affect a child's ability to speak or recall events? Dr. Warren adjusted her glasses. When a child experiences significant trauma, especially something involving betrayal, fear, or physical harm, the brain often protects itself by suppressing memory and speech. In Lily's case, her silence wasn't unwillingness. It was a symptom of deep psychological distress. Julia nodded. And in your professional opinion, could her whispered identification of Mr. Cole be accidental? No. Dr. Warren replied confidently. The fact that Lily responded to a specific presence combined with her behavioral cues and emotional regulation work with the therapy dog points to an intentional, conscious reaction. Her cue wasn't random. Waters rose immediately. Dr. Warren, isn't it true that children can confuse faces, even assign blame inaccurately due to fear? In some cases, yes, Dr. Warren said, but not in Lily's. Her progress was tracked carefully. The moment she saw Mr. Cole, without being prompted, she froze. That level of recognition is not vague fear. It's trauma-linked memory. Waters tried to pivot, but it was clear the jury was locked in. Back at the defense table, Darren Cole's composure began to fray, his jaw clenched tightly, fingers tapping the underside of the table with increasing tension. Judge Halpern, watching from the bench, took a brief note. His eyes flicked between Cole and Lily. Then Julia returned to the podium with one final piece, a traffic camera photo. This photo, she said slowly, was taken 2 days before Lily was reported missing. It's from a gas station 3 blocks from her school. On the screen, blurred but visible, was a silver van. In the driver's seat, a man with short dark hair. Julia turned to the court. The DMV and facial recognition software confirmed that the man behind the wheel is Darren Cole. He was in the area. He had no reason to be there. Gasps rose from the gallery. Waters stood. This doesn't prove anything. Being near a school isn't a crime. No, Julia said, but being there without cause. An A-van later linked to a private rental in his name absolutely matters, especially when that van matches the one Lily drew. Waters fell silent. Judge Halbrin cleared his throat. Let the jury note that circumstantial evidence may be considered in light of all presented. Testimony. The dam was cracking. That afternoon, Julia called her final witness a former cellmate of Darren Cole, Michael Green. A weary man in his late 30s took the stand with a crooked smile. He didn't seem eager to help either side, only interested in his own deal. I'm not proud of what I've done, he said. But when a man brags about snatching a girl and how easy it was, yeah, I listened. Waters objected immediately. Hearsay. Let the jury consider the nature of the statement. The judge ruled. Julia leaned in. Mr. Green, what exactly did Mr. Cole tell you? Green scratched his chin, said he'd watched the girl for weeks, knew her pattern, knew she was quiet, that no one would notice her missing for hours. Said the dog nearly ruined everything. The last sentence sent a ripple through the room. Julia tilted her head. The dog? Green nodded. Yeah. Said some stray or trained mutt showed up at the park and started barking. Spooked him. He took off. Silence. Then Lily's aunt whispered, Max. Julia turned to the jury. This confirms what we suspected. Max didn't just appear randomly that day. He intervened, maybe saved Lily's life. And now, months later, she's able to tell us who hurt her. With his help, Waters called for a recess, but it was too late. The mask had slipped. Darren Cole, no longer confident, glared at the screen showing his van. His fist clenched, and as the judge adjourned for the day, he stood up too quickly. Knocking over his chair, Max instantly rose to his feet from his quiet corner. Lily flinched, and in that moment, every eye in the courtroom saw the truth, not just in the evidence, not just in the child's word, but in the man's reaction. Cole wasn't calm anymore. He was exposed, and everyone knew it. The next morning, the courtroom felt transformed. Reporters had taken their places early. The gallery was full. What began as a low-profile child testimony case had now become something much larger. The atmosphere buzzed with expectation. Lily sat quietly beside her aunt, holding Max's leash in her lap. Max, ever alert, rested his head on her shoes, eyes tracking every movement in the room. His presence had become more than just comfort. It was protection, assurance, and silent testimony all in one. Julia stepped forward. Your Honor, the prosecution rests after today's final testimony. The victim herself. The courtroom froze. Waters leapt up. Your Honor, we maintain our objection. This child is traumatized, highly suggestible, and unreliable. This is emotional theater, not evidence. Judge Halbrin raised a hand. Mr. Waters, you've had your objections noted, but this court will hear from the child. With all appropriate safeguards in place, she will not be cross-examined and may use her own communication method. Lily's aunt gently guided her to the witness seat. She looked small, lost even in the tall chair. Julia approached with calm, holding a sketch pad and markers. Lily, she said softly, I'm not going to ask you to speak. You can draw or write. Or, if you feel safe, you can give Max a sign, and he'll help you. The little girl nodded, eyes fixed on Julia, then down at Max. She took a marker and began drawing slowly. Her hands trembled. The entire courtroom watched, not daring to breathe. She drew a silver van, then a girl inside. Then, on the next page, she drew a man, balding, angry, eyes like fire. Julia asked gently, is this the man who took you? Lily paused, then reached down and patted Max twice behind the ear, the signal she'd been trained to give. Max immediately rose, turned, and walked toward the defense table. His tail was stiff, his ears alert. He growled low and steady and sat directly in front of Darren Cole. The courtroom gasped. Judge Halbrin narrowed his eyes. Cole smirked, shaking his head. This is ridiculous. A dog can't testify. But Julia didn't flinch. She held up the behavioral log kept by Lily's trauma therapist, showing the exact cue Max had been trained to respond to, the same cue Lily gave. Then Julia displayed another photo. Lily, is this the same man? She asked, showing the mugshot of Darren Cole. This time, Lily didn't draw. She nodded, softly but surely. Judge Halpern leaned forward, his voice quiet. The child has identified the defendant using both visual and behavioral cues. The court recognizes the testimony. Waters slammed the folder shut. This is hearsay. A dog cannot replace due process. But the damage was done. A juror, a woman in her 50s, wiped a tear from her eye. Another juror leaned in, whispering something to his neighbor. The tide was turning. Julia took one final step. We'd also like to submit Lily's therapy journal into evidence monitored and guided by her. Counselor, on page 27, she wrote, "The man in the van told me if I screamed, he'd hurt Max. I didn't scream. I waited." Waters stood. "Your Honor, this is unconscionable. This is emotional manipulation of a jury." But Judge Halpern waved him down. "No, Mr. Waters, what's unconscionable is what's being alleged. The court has allowed every legal safeguard. The testimony stands from the gallery." Someone whispered, "She's so brave." Lily heard it. She looked up just once and then did something no one expected. She reached across the stand and placed her tiny hand on Max's head. Then she turned to Judge Halpern and whispered for the first time that day, "He was the one." The room fell into stunned silence. Waters turned pale. Cole stood up, furious. "This is all lies. This is a setup." But Max growled louder. Now, his stance protective. The bailiffs moved quickly to restrain Cole, who'd taken a half-step toward Lily. Judge Halpern's gavel slammed down 3 times. "Enough." Cole shouted, "You people think a dog and a child can lock a man away? You're all insane." Julia raised her voice firmly. "No, Mr. Cole. But you confirmed it just now. You said, a dog and a child. Not this child, not this dog. You knew exactly who we were talking about because you were there." Cole's eyes widened. "Too late." Judge Halpern spoke once more. "Court is adjourned until tomorrow for closing arguments. The jury will then deliberate." As everyone filed out slowly, the media whispering, cameras flashing, one person remained still. Lily. She leaned down, wrapped her arms around Max and whispered, "You did it." He licked her cheek gently, as if to say, "You did too." The final day arrived. Rain tapped gently on the courthouse windows, as if the sky itself sensed the weight of what was to come. Reporters were packed outside. Inside, the atmosphere was tense but focused. Everyone knew today would bring answers. Lily sat again beside her aunt. Max was at her feet, his tail still and ears perked. The jury had deliberated for 4 hours the night before and sent word that morning. They had reached a verdict. Judge Halpern entered the courtroom and adjusted his glasses, bringing the jury. 12 solemn faces filed in. No smiles, no glances, only quiet resolve. The courtroom held its breath. "Has the jury reached a verdict?" Judge Halpern asked. The foreperson, a woman in her 40s with tear-reddened eyes, stood. "Yes, Your Honor, we have." She handed the paper to the bailiff, who passed it to the judge. He read silently, then nodded. "In the case of the state of California v. Darren Cole, on the count of kidnapping a minor, the jury finds the defendant." A pause that felt like eternity. "Guilty." Gasps, sobs, and one loud exhale rippled through the room. "On the count of unlawful restraint and psychological harm to a child." "Guilty." The final blow landed. Darren Cole sat motionless, the smirk he wore for most of the trial now completely erased. Waters dropped his pen in defeat. Julia exhaled, a hand going to her chest as if releasing a burden she had carried for weeks. The judge continued. "Sentencing will take place in 2 weeks. The defendant is to be remanded into custody immediately." The bailiff stepped forward, handcuffing Cole without resistance. His eyes flicked once toward Lily, but this time there was fear in them. Max stood slowly as if he'd understood what had happened. His fur bristled once, then settled. He turned and looked at Lily, who was hugging her aunt tightly. After a moment, Lily let go and walked toward Julia, the courtroom parting for her. As if she were royalty, Julia knelt down, her voice thick with emotion. "You are so brave, Lily. I hope you know that. You didn't just tell the truth. You changed everything." Lily didn't answer. Instead, she reached into her small backpack and pulled out a thank you card hand-drawn with a picture of her and Max standing beneath the sun. She handed it to Julia, then walked to Max and buried her face in his fur. The judge stood. "Before we adjourn, I want to say something not as a judge, but as a human being and a father." This court has witnessed courage beyond words. This young girl has faced her nightmare and stood taller than most grown men would dare. And this dog has proven that justice sometimes wears fur. Laughter and tears filled the room all at once. Later, outside the courthouse, cameras flashed as Julia, Lily, her aunt, and Max stepped out. The reporter surged forward, but none dared shout. It was Lily who surprised everyone. She stopped, turned to the cameras, and spoke. "Max helped me remember I was safe," she said softly, "and because of him, I'm not scared anymore." That was all, but it was everything. The next morning, headlines across the nation carried versions of the same story. Girl and her dog delivered justice. In emotional courtroom trial, K9 and child testified without words. But their message was loud and clear. Donations poured in for therapy dogs. Max was awarded a Medal of Service by the governor. Schools began asking about implementing support animals for trauma survivors. But for Lily, it wasn't about medals or headlines. It was about sleeping through the night, about coloring without fear, about knowing that if she ever needed someone, Max would be there, tail wagging, eyes watching, heart loyal. 2 months later, Lily's drawings now included sunshine, trees, and lots of dogs. The man with angry eyes was no longer part of her pages. Max had been officially adopted by Lily's aunt. He had a new bed, 3 chew toys, and a spot under Lily's desk for nap time. One night, Lily whispered to her aunt, "Do you think Max remembers?" Her aunt kissed her forehead. "He remembers everything that matters, just like you." Outside her window, the stars blinked gently. Inside, a girl and her dog slept side by side, each a little braver, a little freer, and entirely whole again.